that there was a paper due. And do any of you know Maddie Lord?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
She also had no idea that there was a paper due.
She's gonna be here today.
Oh, is today the thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going yet. So we had to get the papers to her by the end of the day. I got a B minus. Which isn't terrible
Hey, the same
considering
day.
they do the
I wouldn't be
paper.
mad. Miho as well.
So it is possible that Gary, Luke, and Paul are at this thing. What time does it start?
6:30.
Oh, then they're not at that thing. They're just not showing up today.
No, Paul's not coming.
Alright. Well, this chapter is actually kind of important. Because you know you guys all have papers and presentations to do at the end of the year, end of the semester.
Well, now I do.
Well, I mentioned it to you all, and then Neil emailed you all a syllabus, and also pointed out, so you have a paper and a presentation you have to do on an economic indicator. Conveniently, most of what this chapter is economic indicators. So this will give you a good idea of ones that you might want to look into. You even immediately have some sort of an idea of what they're going to be about because we're going to talk about them. And they're in the textbook. There is less to cover than I originally thought there was. Not than I originally thought there was, it's just when I opened up the PowerPoint today, the last time I edited it was March 28th of last year, which means we're somewhat kind of like a week ahead of schedule, but also this semester started a week early, so it's just weird because I keep thinking we're going until like May 10th, but we're only going until like May 3rd or something.
It's always like that though.
Huh?
Isn't it always like?
Last year was different, where I think the last class, it
It was
just
a week-
lined up
week
differently.
later. Like,
It
No,
just
last
lined up
year was
slightly different.
May 4th.
last year.
Yes, it was.
It was like May 7th or something. It was like late.
But
it was
also
late
last
this
year, class was on
No, I
Mondays.
left like on May 4th.
I think last year also there was something weird because we did class on like Mondays or Tuesdays, so we might have had the following week also for something.
Yeah.
But what that means is we're making good time, which means, but it also means we're getting close to the end of the semester. So you should think about those papers. I know no one writes papers until the last minute, and it's not a long paper. I think it's like 5 pages. Right? That's not long?
Yeah, no, that's
Space.
fine.
Yeah, double space, you know, all the standards, like 12-point font, 1-inch margins, all that fun stuff. And then it's like a 5-minute presentation. So it doesn't have to be a big deal. It's just like, what is this indicator? How does it help us? What do we use it for? That kind of stuff. Also, this chapter is kind of short, but there is a case study that we will look at. I pulled up a PDF of chapter 10, so we'll kind of go through that. Otherwise, we'll just kind of get started. Oh, what's the name of this chapter again? Oh, Introduction to Economic Fluctuations. So this is kind of what we've been leading into for the entire semester. How does the economy fluctuate? When are we at peak employment and all that fun stuff? Inflation, and how does it all come together? So we have the facts about the business cycle. We have GDP and its components. We've talked about a lot of its components. We have Y equals C plus I plus G plus NX. So when we talk about GDP, we're talking about measuring the total income or total expenditure in the economy. Remember, it could either be the same thing. We could either count everyone's income, or we could count what everyone spent, and it'll still add up to GDP. So if we look at this table, which is in the textbook, all these gray areas are going to be recessions. So you'll see some of them are longer than others. One thing that's kind of important here is that the National Bureau of Economic Research, they have a general definition for recessions. It's 2 quarters of negative growth. What they don't really have is a definition for depressions. Do you guys have any idea of why that might be?
Because there's no like a depression, you can't really measure, I don't know how to explain it. Like, when is it a
extended recession.
Yeah, that's
Well-
what I mean, like, when do you decide that it's a depression?
Well, they haven't decided, but there's a reason they haven't decided. If you hear we're in a depression, what are you gonna do?
Wrong.
Well, yeah, you three will all leave the country. How convenient. But let's say you're here, you can't just leave the country and go to a country where there's no recession, which usually if the United States is in a recession, the rest of you guys are all in a recession too.
Yeah.
But with maybe the exception of Sweden, all those like, Norwegian countries we see. But
Norwegian
not
countries.
Norwegian,
Scandinavian.
Scandinavian. For the last week I've been trying to remember the 3 countries, and I know we always use, well, the trick I was taught was no sweat Finland, like don't sweat about it or whatever.
Yeah.
But I couldn't remember Finland, which is,
So you're just like no sweat.
Yeah.
I sh-
Denmark counts as Scandinavian.
oh, does it? I should know that. But so anyway, my point here is, what's going to happen if we all think we're in a depression?
Panic.
Panic. What are you going to do if you're panicking?
Take all your money out.
You're going to take your money out of the system, you're going to save your money. Are you going to go out and buy stuff?
No.
No, consumption goes down, GDP goes down, it just makes everything worse. So they don't want to tell anyone that we're in a depression, because if you say we're in a depression, people think we're in a depression, even if we're not in one. Though if they really think we're in a depression, we're probably in a depression. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. So I think I said this, the old rule of thumb for when we talk about recessions is it's 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. And you'll see here the recession is going to start near the peak of our economy. So whenever we were close to the top, whenever we just experienced a lot of growth. Then once that starts slowing down, once that happens, we hit the recession, we start the recession, and the recession stops when things start turning around, when things get better. So growth starts improving, unemployment goes down. And one thing that we also find here is investment spending is much more volatile than consumption. Do you guys have an idea of why that might be?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
We find that investment spending is more volatile than consumption. Do you have an idea of why that might be true?
Well, you wouldn't invest if there's a recession, would you?
Alright, you might be less likely to make investments, it's too risky.
You have to keep consuming a similar amount, surely.
Yeah, consumption can't really change, because in consumption is, cost of living. Food, transportation, housing, clothing, things like that. Things you mostly still have to spend money on. I mean, some people, they won't go out to eat so much or at all. They'll just buy food instead. So spending might transfer a little bit, but consumption stays generally the same. And what do we say consumption is dependent on? If you think back to chapter 5,
Output.
what was it?
Output?
Output and,
Income.
income and
Taxes.
income and taxes. The government doesn't really just go in and do a broad sweeping tax cut, if incomes go down, generally speaking. But investment is dependent on our interest rate. So if people aren't saving, interest rate's gonna go up, investments look less profitable, essentially. So that's getting more into the finance side of things, but it's the same idea. But during recessions, there's still going to be negative growth in both consumption and investment, which makes sense. We're in a recession, we're not going to have tremendous growth in consumption. That just doesn't add up. Okay, and then,
Gary's on his way.
who?
Gary.
Oh, are you guys coming from something?
Yeah, it's interview forum thing.
Who's leading that?
Mm-hmm.
Who's leading it?
It was Jen Santiago. It was she's from Enterprise. And then
So we're only on slide 2 or 3. So just what we have here is growth in consumption versus growth in investment. You'll see, which is interesting, is consumption is still mostly always positive. Mostly. I mean, we still have these some areas where consumption does decrease, and it usually is in the steeper recessions, right? When I say, but for the most part, we have positive growth in consumption. Also, I mean, generally, if you think about it, the population increases, and if there's more people, those people have to be consuming something. You can't increase the population and have less consumption. Except, unless there's some crazy scenario out there. Investment, notice, is much, well, actually, if you look, what's one indicator that we're going to be looking at something that's much more volatile? There's something noticeable about these two graphs.
Is that a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, this one, like the scale's different.
Yeah, the scale is wildly different. So even if you might look at this and go, I don't know, they don't look that far off. Notice, we're looking at anywhere from -40 to growth to 50% growth. Granted, we don't hit -40% growth. But here we're looking at 2 to 8%. That's a much more narrow range. And when we're looking at a more narrow range, we have less volatility. It might go up and down a lot within that range, but it's pretty consistent as to where it is. Whereas here, we're all over the place. Even if you look, you might say, oh, that's pretty consistent. You're looking at 0 to 20% just in this little section here. Okay. So just some facts about the business cycle. We have unemployment and Okun's law. So we talked about unemployment last week. Unemployment is going to increase during a recession. It makes sense. We cut back on the number of people we're employing, all that fun stuff. So Okun's law, a decrease in employment leads to a decrease in GDP. If we're hiring less people, they're working less hours, we're not going to produce as much. Which is what actually our next bullet says. So since employees aren't working, they can't produce goods. I'd be interested to see how this is going to change going forward, considering we're moving more towards robots manufacturing stuff. So people are going to be laid off, but we're still going to have high production. You can produce 10 cars now with one person watching 10 machines, whereas it used to be you could produce one car with 10 people. So it's just it's a shift in where employees are going. So that was what kind of unemployment?
When it's not functional, when you switch over from different industries.
Yeah. All right, well, we'll get back to me on that. We'll notice that year-to-year changes in unemployment are closely related to GDP growth. So percent change in GDP, this is the rule, equals 3% minus 2 times the change in the unemployment rate. So if unemployment does not change, we expect 3% growth. So if unemployment changes by 1%, if it goes up 1%, we would expect higher GDP growth. So if we increase employment, we're going to expect higher GDP growth than 3%. If unemployment decreases, we'll expect lower
You said
GDP growth.
Wait, you just missed it. You said if we increase unemployment.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I meant to say if we increase employment. If we increase unemployment, GDP growth is going to go down because unemployment's going up. If we decrease unemployment, GDP is going to go up because more people are working. And if more people are working, they can produce more goods.
It revolves around the 3% change.
What?
Revolves around the 3% change.
Yeah, we kind of center around this 3% change.
Okay.
So now we have some leading economic indicators. So these are the important things that you have to pay attention to for the paper. Were 3 of you or 2 of you here when I started talking about the paper?
3.
Right.
Right, alright. So there's a paper due at the end of the semester. It has to be on an economic indicator. These are some good ones that you might want to look into. I think it's like 5 pages. It specifies it in the syllabus. So leading economic indicators. Indicators that fluctuate ahead of the overall economy. That's what we mean by leading. They are out in front. So average weekly hours in manufacturing. So more hours, more working hours indicates higher demand for a product. So this is something that's going to change ahead of realized economic growth. Firms are going to start hiring more people. They're going to have them work longer and produce more goods. Average weekly initial claims for unemployment. New claims is one of the most quickly available indicators because, you know, if someone gets laid off, they're not going to wait 3 months to file for unemployment. They're going to get laid off and get unemployment, you know, file for unemployment right away. So if we see a large increase in this, that's going to tell us that maybe something's going on in the economy. Average new orders for consumer goods and materials. This is a direct measure of demand for consumer goods. So if we see a bunch of new orders coming in, that means we expect a lot of new demand, essentially. We have manufacturers' new orders for non-defense capital goods, excluding aircraft. This seems like a very, very specific indicator. But think about it. The government is one of the largest purchasers in the world, in the country and the world. You know, the U.S. government purchases a lot of stuff. They also purchase a lot of military equipment. They purchase a lot of stuff to produce military equipment. So we don't want to include that because we don't know what's going on. You know, but we're going to include all these other stuff, like what are businesses doing? What do they expect to happen? Do they need to invest a lot in order to produce more goods? But we're not going to worry about defense goods and, for some reason, aircraft. I'm suspicious it's because aircraft could often be used for defense reasons.
So if United buys more planes, it's not going to appear in that?
No. More planes will not appear in that. Well, I think also one of the other tricky things is there's really only like 2 commercial's not the word I want. What is it when we all fly?
Domestically?
No, like we're not businesses, so we're not commercial airliners. Well, I guess commercial airliners are tricky. They're just like one of those businesses, they're not really profitable. That's not why we don't include them. I don't remember what my original point was when I started the sentence because I forgot what the end of the sentence was, but.
They run like a monopoly, because there's only like 3 of them.
Oh yes, that's what I was gonna say. There's really only like 2 airplane companies that commercial airliners buy from. We have Boeing, and then that's mostly what we use in the United States. And I think in Europe they mostly use Airbus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So those are really the 2 competing things. But just because it's a monopoly doesn't necessarily mean we wouldn't include it. It's just we just don't. And then ISM New Orders Index. So it's reports on broad changes in orders, which just lets us know what's going to happen. Make sense so far?
What's that mean?
Like it just reports on a whole bunch of different orders. So like our orders increasing line, whatever they're measuring, are they decreasing? If they're decreasing, that's not a good sign. If they're increasing, it's probably a good sign. And these again are all leading indicators. So these are something that someone might look at and be like, oh, the economy's going to start growing soon. All these things are happening. We have more leading economic indicators. So we have building permits for new private housing units. So increase in permits indicates increased investment. Remember, building a new house is the only way households can invest. It's the only capital good a household can produce. Purchasing a house that already exists does not count. Only building new ones. So are there a lot of people deciding to build new houses? That's a good sign. Because also that affects the construction industry, which is a very big part of our economy. We also have an index of stock prices. So this reflects a bunch of expectations about the future. So we have, 4 finance people here? No, you're business administration, right? No finance. What? And, right, but not finance. And then you're finance. And then your history with an econ. What?
Paul is finance.
Right. Whenever we talk about stock prices, all we're talking about is the net present value of future expected earnings. That's all this is saying. If stock prices are going down, we're expecting future earnings to go down of companies, which means we're expecting them to either produce less or, yeah, pretty much that's it. Produce less or lower their prices, but they wouldn't lower their prices. That just wouldn't make sense. And if stock prices are going up, we expect these companies to be doing well into the future. So we expect them to earn more. We have the leading credit index, so it's a composite of 6 financial indicators, and a decline in credit leads to a decrease in overall spending. This kind of just makes sense if you think about it. Well, for one, people spend a lot of money on credit. It helps smooth our spending, right? That's one of the reasons we like having credit available to people, because otherwise people might just purchase, on the 1st and the 15th of the month, make all their purchases then. With credit, it's easier to smooth things along, and then maybe you need something on the 20th, but you're not paying for it until the 1st. So if credit decreases, one, people aren't going to buy as much stuff, especially if they can't pay for it over the long term. Like washing machines, cars, or whatever. So if credit goes down, it's not a good sign for consumption. And then, of course, we have the investment rate spread. So the 10-year Treasury bond minus the federal funds rate. So a large spread here means that interest rates are expected to rise from increased activity. How many of you are in money and banking? 1, 2. Is Paul?
No, I wanted it
Yeah, I've done it
3
like
semesters ago.
Oh, so it'll be offered again like in the fall or something, or next spring, whatever it is. You talk a lot about the spread in that class. You talk about the inverted yield curve and all that fun stuff. Exciting stuff, right?
I mean, we didn't talk
Oh,
much about it.
We talked a little bit about the inverted yield curve, but
the investment rate spread, that's something that's important that we want to look at. And then, of course, we have average consumer expectations. If you ask, a bunch of consumers, what do you think is going to happen in the future, and a bunch of them are pessimistic about it, they're not going to be spending money on things. They're going to want to save their money because they think things aren't going to go well into the future, which kind of makes sense. If you think maybe you're not going to have a job in 6 months, you're going to start saving a ton of money, so that way you can look for a job. I mean, you're also going to be looking for a job, but that's another story. All right. Time horizons. So we have 2 key things about time horizons in macro. We talk about the short run versus the long run. So our key difference here, whenever someone says long run versus the short run, it means are prices flexible or are they sticky? If it's short run, prices aren't changing. If it's the long run, prices will change. So if we assume that the Fed reduces the money supply by 5%, that's just something we're going to go into for this. We have the classical dichotomy. So remember, what was the classical dichotomy? Do you remember? There's an equation.
Inflation.
What?
Doesn't include inflation.
Does not include inflation. Dr. Nick's favorite.
the GDP from
Money supply times velocity, money equals price times GDP. Only nominal variables are affected, so only prices, right? PV. So economists believe that in the long run, this is true. The short run, this is not true. In the long run, this is true. So in the long run, all goods will reduce in price by 5%, but there will be no change in output. In the short run, prices will not change, and then in that case, output will change. I see some of you thinking about that. Does that make sense?
Can you say it again, please?
Yeah, so in the long run, if the Fed reduces the money supply by 5%, in the long run, prices will change by 5%. So if the money supply, this goes down by 5%, then P will also decrease by 5% in the long run. In the short run, the money supply decreases by 5%. Prices are not going to change because it's the short run. They are fixed. What's going to have to change is production. That will decrease by 5% in the short run.
And that's just offset by the decrease in price in the long run?
In the long run, Y will increase back to normal and prices will go down 5%. But so what that means is in the short run, real variables are going to change. So remember, real variables don't include prices, they don't include nominal things. So output, velocity. And velocity equals something.
Sorry, what was SR?
Short run.
Wow.
Yeah, sorry. I think that abbreviation, like short run, long run, they become very important when we get into chapter 11 and 12. That's when we start talking about the ISLM model. Those are going to be long weeks, just preparing you guys now. We might actually have to cut up one of the chapters into 2 weeks. I think chapter 12, I usually try to cut up. But we'll get there, in a couple weeks. We'll worry about it then. This is important to remember though, because if the money supply is going to decrease, in the short run, output is also going to decrease. In the long run, we're not going to worry about that kind of stuff. So we have the model of aggregate supply, aggregate demand. So in the classical macroeconomics, output depends on the ability to supply goods and services. Flexible prices are a critical assumption for the classical theory. Because if we assume, if we think prices aren't going to go down in the future, they can't go down in the future, then this all gets affected. Because then that means what's going to change is Y, our output. So for this model to exist, we really have to believe that prices will adjust. When prices are sticky, the economy also depends on demand, which is influenced by many factors, which we talked about, some of them already. We talked about confidence, we talked about firms' perception of monetary profitability, and then we have monetary and fiscal policy. Demand itself, we already said, it's one of our leading indicators when we talk about consumer confidence. Or if firms don't think they're going to be profitable, they might start firing people. If you're going to fire people, those people aren't going to purchase as much goods. It all, in the long run, will affect demand. Short run, not long run, short run. Are we good so far? Do I talk very quickly?
No, it's fine.
I'm just, like last year I felt like I was always going over an hour and a half, or an hour and 25 minutes. And like last week or the week before, I think was the first time I kept you guys that long. So sometimes I think I might have just gotten quicker at talking. Anyway, aggregate demand. So aggregate demand is the relationship between the quantity of output demanded and the aggregate price level. And remember, when we talk about aggregate, we mean total. So we have the quantity equation as aggregate demand. So MV equals PY can be written in terms of supply and demand for real money balances. So M over P
Will equal.
M over P demanded So remember, the D means demand. And that's going to equal K times Y. So K, what's important here, this is like an asterisk. I don't know where to put it. So this makes sense because K, we can rewrite it as Y over V. Essentially, it's the same thing, but we just like to use K instead.
What does K stand for again?
1 over V.
No, besides that,
V is velocity.
I think that was capital.
Oh, that's a capital K. We're talking about lowercase k.
Okay.
I know, it's a big difference, right?
This is a constant.
Huh?
Just a constant though.
Capital C.
It's a constant.
So this K is just a constant for 1/v, okay.
Yeah. But remember, in the long run, V doesn't change. Only the short run will real variables change. So if we assume V is constant and M is fixed by the central bank, then we have a negative relationship between P and Y. So if prices go up, Y is going to go down. If prices go down, Y is going to go up. Because we're saying M and V are fixed right now. Which would affect prices and output. And I mean, if we think about our supply and demand curve, so prices, output, or that's always how it is, right? P and Q? Yeah. As prices go up, we're going to demand less. So as prices go down, we demand more. And that's just, crap, I forgot all the economics I ever knew all of a sudden. Demand. Mihal walked in. I got worried she was going to come in here, and then she was going to catch me saying something wrong. That wouldn't have been good. Oh, she's going to the thing.
Yeah.
But this makes sense to everyone, right? This is what we've been learning in econ since macro 1, since intro. So we could talk about shifts in aggregate demand curve. So the curve tells us all possible combinations of P and Y given a fixed money supply. So if we change the money supply, we're going to change P over Y. Well, P and Y, this relationship. So, you know, it's one of those things, again, when we talk about shifts versus movements, if the money supply doesn't change, we're going to move along this line. Once you change the money supply, then we have to shift. So if we decrease the money supply, we're going to have to move this way. If we increase the money, decrease. If we move this way, we're increasing M. And really all that's saying is, if we decrease the money supply, we might still produce here on all of these, but the thing that's changing is that nominal price. Because the price doesn't matter, it's just it's just one of those things, it's a price, we assign it. Aggregate supply. So aggregate supply is a relationship between the quantity of goods and services supplied at the price level. So there are two types. We have aggregate supply in the long run, and we have aggregate supply in the short run. So according to the classical model, output does not depend on the price level, so it is a vertical line. So we could say right here, this is our long run aggregate supply. Regardless of the price level, that's how much we're going to produce.
Wait, why are we assuming that the long runs?
Because it goes back to this. We said that in the long run, only nominal variables change. So price is going to change.
Okay.
But output will not change. Output stays the same. Because in the short run, output will be affected.
I just would assume long run it wouldn't be steady, it would be flexible. in the long run for supply. You can move, like, in terms of like making changes. In the short run, you can't change much. So if you were to, I don't know, expand or something like that, wouldn't that affect?
This is the way I've always reconciled it in my head. Because I agree with you. I'm like, I don't get it, because we could always produce more, right?
Yeah.
I think about it, about the economy being at 100%. We're gonna produce at 100%, or we're gonna produce below 100%. That's how I've always thought about it. That's the only way I can reconcile it in my head. And I've tried so many different ways to be like, well, what do you mean? We always will wind up producing more. But if we think about it in a percentage term of how much can we produce, let's say we always produce 99% of what we're capable of doing. And then there's a money supply shock, right? And then Y has to decrease. Well, Y is gonna go down below 99%. Maybe it'll go to 97%. But eventually we'll get back to 99%.
Then wouldn't that be? That's no, like what you said. We're producing at 99%, and we have that money supply shock. In the short run,
We'll produce less. Prices won't change.
okay.
In the long run, we're gonna get back to 99%. We'll reduce prices over the next 15 years, or however long it is. We'll get back to that 99%.
Okay.
That's how I've always reconciled it in my head.
Okay.
Which is the best word I can think of, reconciled. Because there's some things that you'll look at and you're like, but how can I accept this? And then when you think of it in that one way, you're like, oh, that does make sense again.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean.
Were there any other questions on that? I don't remember where I am. I have to figure out where I'm at. Oh, we're at the short run now, right? So the short run. So the horizontal aggregate supply curve. So since in the short run prices do affect output, the curve is going to be horizontal. So this is going to be short run. So price will be here. Demand will be, all over here. Where am I going with this? Oh, yeah, it's the same idea. So this is where we're going to supply. Price will just change. No, price doesn't change. The amount produced changes. So we'll either produce here, or here, or here, depending on where the money supply is. So decrease in money supply, we're going to produce here. D is going to stand for decrease here, not demanded. This was our equilibrium. And then, so this Y is going to be an increase. Because again, when we have a money supply change in the short run, the thing that changes is output, not price. I should have drawn a second graph. Now that I'm looking at this, it looks really ugly.
So can you say why? I heard you already said it. Why does output change in the short run again, rather than price?
Because the thing that's going to change.
It's too expensive to change prices.
What?
It's too expensive to change prices, isn't it?
Well, prices are just sticky in the short run. We're not going to go and change prices all of a sudden. And one of the things we talked about shoe leather costs, we talked about menu costs. Like there are all these costs associated with changing the price, right?
Yeah.
But you can always just produce more. At this amount of money in the system, this is what is demanded. That's what's going to be produced.
Okay.
Was that part of your question?
What
It goes back.
as to why output. It's just too hard to. So prices are always sticky in the short run.
Yeah, in the short run, prices will be sticky. In the long run, that's when they're going to change. So, hold
I'm
on.
thinking in terms of more like.
I'm going to redraw this
I'm
for a
thinking in
second.
terms of supply, and in my head, I'm thinking the first thing that would change if a money supply shock were to happen. In my head, I can't get it out there. It would be flipped. Like in the long run, it would be different.
long run aggregate supply.
Okay.
And then we have short run aggregate supply. Think about this. When prices go up, what do firms want to do?
Keep making money.
Someone.
Produce more, keep making money. But we always say when prices go up, firms produce more, right? That's why when we think about supply and demand, think about it. So we have Y, Y, Y. So Y, Y, Y. What?
Got my answer.
To what?
I was wondering what Y was. It's
Output. Yeah. Which one of these did I want to use for my example? I don't remember. Oh wait, we're gonna build this next chapter. I don't want to jump ahead because I have a bunch of notes that go with this.
Okay.
But this is short run. In the short run, the prices are not going to change, but we'll produce more, or we'll produce less, depending on how the money changes. And then it goes back to, I always forget, we have to like ignore a bunch of things that we know to be true.
But we're not talking about a price change, we're talking about a money supply change.
Yes, and that's why we're looking at a new P and Y. Because if we go back to somewhere along here, might have been the last.
Assuming it's too expensive to change prices, people to sell.
I think it's on the last slide here. So right here, MV equals PY is fixed. Like that, they just equal each other, right? So if M goes down, something on this side has to go down. In the short run, we're saying prices aren't going to change. No one's going to go and just change their prices. So then Y has to go down in the short run. In the long run, we're going to go back to that 100%. I don't care what the price is, we're going to go back to that 100%.
But to get back to that 100%, prices would have adjusted in the
Yeah, and yeah, that prices will adjust, we'll get back to normal. We'll get back to this output at that price, or this output at this price. Prices will go down or they'll go up, but we'll get back to 100%.
Okay, that makes more sense now.
So a reduction in the money supply, again, this is short run, reduces the amount of goods sold, but not the price. So we've reduced the money supply, the amount of goods sold have gone from Y1 to Y2, price stays the same. So, from the short run to the long run. So with an initial change in the money supply, the aggregate demand shifts downward along the short run aggregate supply, so we move it here. But in the long run, moves down AD back to the long run aggregate supply. So, now I know I put them back on the same graph, but hopefully this one's easier to read now. Short. So, we changed the money supply, we moved to here. So we now have Y1, Y2. So we do that, we decrease the amount that's produced, but in the long run, we'll move along this new line, this new money supply. Get back to Y1 at now P2. So this is the first thing that happens. Money supply decreases, then in the long run, we're going to go back to our original production. The case study. You guys can be honest with me. Did any of you read this chapter? Did you even know we were on chapter 10? Did you all think we were on chapter 8?
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't have to do chapter 8. I should have emailed you earlier in the week, probably. Sorry about that. But so, this case study. Why do firms keep sticky prices? So, what's nice about this case study is there really wasn't that much reading. It might be a different case study in the book that you're using, I don't know. I pulled I used, this one's 8. Are you guys looking at 8 or 9 in general?
So this chapter 10.
It's
We
chapter,
have-
I meant, which edition?
Oh.
We have this.
Oh, it's the same one,
Is it
alright.
the 8th edition though?
I just Googled quick and pulled up the 8th edition.
It's a different page, but it's the same case study.
Oh, perfect, alright. Oh, well, because I think also, well, I found like the 6th edition for some reason yesterday because I was at work and I didn't want to download anything. But so, like the 6th edition, it's like missing like 4 chapters. But so anyway, we don't have to do any of this reading. This reading's all like whatever. It's not that long anyway. What's interesting to look at here is these 2 tables. So I'm trying to get. So the one table is how often do firms change prices, essentially, and it's by percentage. So you'll see the vast majority of, well, not majority, but the plurality, I guess, would be the correct term, of firms change prices once a year. 39.3% of firms will change prices once a year. And then you have 1.6% of firms change prices more than 365 days a year. I'm sure that has changed nowadays, now that there's a lot of online shopping, e-commerce, whatever. Like Amazon probably changes their prices every 3 minutes,
That's
you know.
who offers the lowest price in the $5.
What?
That offers, that's on who offers the lowest price in the $5.
What's the Bible?
It's like well, what you can click to buy something. If someone's selling your textbook for $50, they're gonna sell it for $49, you're gonna own the box. So you own the space in the box. You wanna set the lowest price, then you get all the quick purchase.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't really like to shop online. I like to hold things
And
before I buy
unless,
them.
well, unless it's like an Amazon product or something, yeah, but it's buying, if you're buying from a third party or first, you're buying whoever publishes the price.
2 hours just buy.
Wait, I'm sorry. There were like 4 things going on, but that makes sense. Like whoever has the lowest price, that's who Amazon's gonna sell to.
Give the
Right?
box to
Yeah.
them.
But yes, no, I don't like to online shop. I need to hold things. Because what most people do is online shop clothes. I don't want to order from some brand and then get it and it's not the right size.
Online shop like snacks and stuff.
I don't eat snacks. Bananas, oranges, apples. I try to be healthy. I don't appear as healthy as I eat, but I swear I am. I drink a lot. But anyway, 39%, they'll only change prices once a year. 1.6% change prices more than 365 times a year. That's going to be those online companies. And then if we start looking at, well, why is that the case? I'm going to zoom in a bit so we can see a bit more of this. Percent of managers who accepted theory. So coordination here. So firms hold back on price changes because they're waiting for other people to change their prices first. No one wants to be the first company to increase a price if costs are going up. Cost-based pricing with lag. So maybe we didn't realize that our costs had gone up. We're not going to change our prices. We realized the cost went up. And then there's just all these different reasons. What's this bottom one? Judging quality by price. So firms fear customers will mistake price cuts for reduction in quality. Oh, that's actually a pretty good one. It's an interesting thought. I didn't even think of that. I'd be like, oh wow, it's cheaper, awesome, let me buy it. But anyway, regardless, there are all these different reasons. Hierarchical delays. So they don't make the decision, someone above them makes the decision. So there's tons of reasons why prices aren't going to change in the short run. In the long run, they will. You'll notice we have lags in the word right here. We're waiting. We don't want someone else to do it. So we're waiting for something to happen. It's all about that waiting game. Let's see, is there anything else important in here? No. All right, stabilization policy. So exogenous events that shift aggregate demand or aggregate supply are known as shocks. So demand shock makes sense, is an event that affects demand, and a supply shock is an event that affects supply. So stabilization policy is just an attempt to reduce the effect of a shock to the system. We're trying to stabilize everything. Stabilization policies can dampen the business cycle by keeping levels as close to normal as possible. So if they're dampening it, that means we might not get as much of a rise in growth, but we're also not going to get as much of a recession or decrease in growth. And one thing that we've learned about human behavior is that we hate losing things much more than we love gaining things. If you get $1 million, that's amazing. Losing $1 million, that's terrible. Really, like, people do terrible things after they've lost money like that. But if you win $1 million, I mean, people still do some pretty stupid stuff, but usually they're not doing terrible things. And then we have shocks to aggregate demand, so introduction and expanded availability of credit cards. This is just kind of like an example. So it reduced the quantity of money that people hold, and it increased the velocity. So in the short run, the increase in demand raises the output of the economy, because now everyone has a bunch of credit that they're spending. Therefore, employers now give higher wages, and then as a reaction, because we don't want things to get out of hand, the Fed's going to reduce the money supply. Kind of just to hold things back a little bit. And then we have some shocks to aggregate supply. You guys like how I took pictures of the textbook and inserted it instead of cutting and pasting? So we have shocks to aggregate supply. So since they have a direct effect on price, they are sometimes referred to as price shocks. So we have a drought that destroys crops. We could have EPA laws that reduce emissions. We have increased union aggressiveness. All of these things will affect prices. So in this little example here, we have an adverse supply shock shifts the short-run aggregate supply curve upwards. So aggregate supply shifts up. All right, no big deal. That's the first thing that happens. But then that also causes the price level to increase. If the price level increases, people are going to move along their aggregate demand curve, and they're now going to purchase less. So it has this effect on the economy where consumption goes down. All right, and then our favorite, stagflation. So we have falling output, we have increased unemployment, and somehow we have rising prices. We're producing less, no, people aren't working, but prices rise. So for this, the Fed essentially has two options. We can hold aggregate demand steady, which will lead to an eventual fall in prices. So that's kind of like deflation, due to a decreased output and employment. So that's one thing that could happen. Or we could expand aggregate demand to bring the levels closer to normal. So prices are kept high, and there's no way to increase employment and keep prices low. Those are kind of the two things that we're left with at that point. I think that might be the last slide. It is.
How would they expand aggregate demand? Like lower rates, increase spending, hopefully, or consumption?
Yeah, they'd have to increase consumption somehow. So they could cut taxes. What else could they do?
Government spending.
Increase government spending, though that would decrease national savings. Now that we have that model from chapter 7, you have like all these things that can happen all at once. But that's pretty much it for today. If you guys have any?
I'm just like confused over the why do they increase the spending? Is it just to stimulate it to try to get people to increase confidence, or?
Well, increase government. So if we look back to y equals c plus I plus g plus nx, if we increase government spending, y is going to increase. It just comes down to that. You could increase consumption, y will increase. You can increase government spending, y will increase. You can increase both. Savings will be affected, which will then affect interest in the long investment in the long run. in the short run. I keep not confusing long run and short run, but I use them interchangeably, which I can't do in this unit. But I hope you guys have a point there. I have your homework. Do you have your homework? You said you would email it to me.
Yeah, okay, I gotta do that still.
Alright.
Yeah, I forgot about it.
Wait, I owe you something or yes?
No, I have to give something back to you.
I thought we had homework this week, I was like, oh.
No. Let me check, hold on. I think I know when your next assignment is. We are now in part 4. You will have questions for chapter 11 and 12. They'll be combined as one assignment. What I did last semester was I canceled class one day. I gave like 6 or 7 questions and I had everyone just meet. You guys, they were able to pick the times, but they all met. I even went and checked on them. But they had to work together. That was kind of the big thing of that, because like I said, the big idea of this class is you guys all get to know each other, you'll get comfortable working with each other, and then when you make it to next semester or whatever it is, you won't worry about like, oh, I don't know my teammates, so I don't know how I'll work with them, so you just start working on that now, essentially. But we're done for today. Let me just turn my phone off so it doesn't die on me.